The sun hadn't even cleared the horizon at 6:17 a.m. when the sound of splintering wood jolted me awake. I was halfway through pouring my morning coffee, still in my old flannel pajamas, when I heard a rhythmic thudding, like an amateur demolition crew had decided my backyard was their playground. I stumbled to the window and saw them. 6 figures in crisp cargo pants and sun visors, stomping through my garden in the quiet cul-de-sac of Willow Creek, Oregon, like they were on a mission to liberate my petunias. Leading the charge was Laura Hensley, president of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association and self-proclaimed empress of all things manicured and orderly. She didn't knock, didn't text, didn't even glance at the gate they just kicked in. Instead, she zeroed in on the ancient maple tree by my garage, pointing at it like it was evidence in a crime scene. "That tree," she declared, voice sharp enough to cut glass, "is non-compliant." I wasn't fully awake, and even at my sharpest, it's hard to take someone seriously when they're dressed like a safari guide who forgot their compass. I took a slow sip of coffee, watching as Laura and her clipboard-toting posse fanned out across my lawn, planting little orange flags like they were claiming uncharted territory. "We have evidence you've altered your landscaping without proper authorization," Laura said, her tone dripping with the weight of someone announcing a federal indictment. "That's a Level 3 violation. For context, my yard is a modest half-acre of grass, a few flower beds, and a wooden trellis I'd rigged up last weekend for my climbing roses." The alteration she was so offended by? That trellis. The audacity. But this wasn't about roses or wood. It was about me skipping every HOA meeting since I moved here in the summer of 2023. It was about my refusal to paint my garage the approved shade of taupe or mow my lawn on their Sacred Tuesday schedule. It was about control, and I wasn't playing along. When Laura thrust a cease and desist letter at me for my unauthorized structural modification, I just grinned. "Laura," I said, leaning against the doorframe, "you storm my yard like it's D-Day over a rose trellis, and now you're serving papers before I've had breakfast?" She didn't flinch. Humor wasn't in her playbook. "Noncompliance will lead to further action," she hissed, and I knew she meant it. Laura didn't make threats unless the trap was already set. Sure enough, the next morning, a neon yellow notice was taped to my front door, announcing a mandatory yard inspection for code adherence. I could picture her, clipboard in hand, that smug smirk she wore when she once declared unapproved mailbox decals a community blight. But Laura didn't know me. I don't yell. I don't panic. I play the long game, and I had time to burn. Instead of arguing or lawyering up, I got creative. I turned my backyard into a masterpiece of sabotage, a muddy, glorious obstacle course. First, I tweaked the sprinklers to run all night, soaking the soil into a boot-sucking swamp. Then I redirected some gutter runoff to carve a slick trench at the base of the hill. I dragged an old swing set from the garage, rigging it with low-hanging garden stakes and rose cages, just enough to trip the unwary. For the final touch, I painted a big plywood sign bright yellow. "Caution, soil testing zone. Keep out." I watered it twice a day for good measure. 3 days later, they came. 9 of them this time, Laura at the helm, clutching a laminated map of my yard like it was a battle plan. She paused at the gate, sniffed the air like a hound, and barked, "Begin inspection." First in was Tom, the guy who once fined a neighbor for planting daisies too close to the curb. He took 2 steps before his sneakers sank into the sludge with a wet slurp. "This is," he started, then pitched forward, face planting into what used to be my grass. Behind him, Susan yelped, slipped sideways into the trench, and flailed like a fish out of water. Within a minute, Laura's inspection team looked like they'd stumbled out of a Civil War reenactment, mud-streaked and clutching their clipboards like life rafts. Laura stood at the edge, somehow still pristine, her jaw so tight I could hear her teeth grinding from my porch. "Is this a prank?" she shouted. I sipped my coffee. "Prank, Laura? This is a soil drainage experiment. I filed the county paperwork for an educational exemption." Her face turned the color of my warning sign. "You can't do this. This is sabotage." I shrugged. "You broke my gate and trespassed. What did you expect?" Her phone rang, and her expression shifted as she muttered about trespass complaints and liability. Someone's lawyer had clearly told her to back off. They squelched away, defeated, and I hosed off my masterpiece, already plotting phase 2. Laura didn't quit. The next day, a certified letter arrived, stamped with the HOA's new logo, a hawk atop a flagpole. They'd held an emergency meeting, read, coffee clutch at Laura's, and passed a rule declaring my backyard a shared aesthetic zone, meaning they could regulate it like a front lawn. The letter demanded I remove my trellis, resod the mud, and eliminate alarming elements. The sign, obviously. Worse, they'd scheduled a neighborhood tour for prospective buyers to showcase Willow Creek excellence, and my yard was on the list. Laura didn't just want compliance. She wanted to parade my defeat. But I wasn't done. I leveled the mud pit into a deliberate path, framed it with garden edging, and strung ropes between posts to create a boot camp vibe. I planted colorful flags with plaques naming sections Grit Gulch and Tenacity Trench. I added fake testimonials on laminated signs. This mud saved my career. Lisa, CFO. Best team building ever. Greg, unemployed. A vinyl banner across the fence read, "Welcome to the Willow Creek Mud Challenge, a wellness partnership." It was bait, dressed in the HOA's favorite buzzwords: community, wellness, unity. Laura showed up alone the day before the tour, polo starched to perfection, iPad in hand. I watched from the attic as she stepped onto the path, her boots sinking just enough to make her wince. She ducked under ropes, snapped photos, and hesitated. My setup was chaos, but it was chaos cloaked in her language. She couldn't ban it without looking like she hated community health. She left without a word. The tour day was chaos perfected. Families flooded my yard, kids splashing through the mud, parents laughing, ignoring Laura's welcome table. A CrossFit dad asked to bring his group next week. Laura tried to intervene, shouting about unapproved events, but no one cared. They were too busy having fun. By the end, my yard was a swamp, but it had hosted over 60 people, selfies, and smiles. Laura stormed off, muttering about emergency protocols. I'd turned her tour into my triumph. But I wasn't done. I filed a county complaint against the HOA for trespassing and harassment, backed by photos and neighbor testimonies. Then I discovered a bylaw Laura herself had written, allowing community enrichment events if 3 residents signed off and no objections were filed within 10 days. 2 weeks earlier, I'd slipped a request for a Willow Creek Mud Challenge into the HOA Dropbox, co-signed by my neighbors Sarah, Mike, and retired landscaper Ed. Laura, distracted, had approved it. The event was legal. That Saturday, over 70 neighbors showed up. I added a scoreboard, dividing the course into challenges like sludge sprint and rope reckoning. Kids refereed, adults cheered, and a local news crew tipped off by Sarah filmed it all, framing it as a rebellion against HOA tyranny. Laura arrived, clutching my approval form, speechless as families laughed and splashed. Even her new enforcer, Greg, shrugged and said, "Looks fun. Keep it off the flower beds." The final blow was the HOA election. I nominated myself for president, and within days, 8 others ran for board seats. Laura's scare tactics flyers about dangerous agitators flopped. I held a root beer float forum in my yard, sharing data on HOA overreach and uniting neighbors. When votes were counted, turnout hit 87%. I won president, and Laura's reign ended. She stormed out, but the neighborhood had changed. The mud dried, but the spirit didn't. We now hold an annual Willow Warrior Challenge, and Laura's just another voice, no longer the loudest. What do you think? Was I too harsh on Laura, or did she deserve it? Should HOAs have this much power, or is it time to rethink their role? Should I push for more events like this, or keep the peace? Comment below, like, and subscribe for more stories of standing up to the clipboard tyrants.